Alrighty, so this video is going to go over a couple different things about, if you see me looking over here, I'm just looking at my notes, about different ways that you can save things in Unity. There are no right ways necessarily to save things in Unity, but there are ways that will make your life a little bit harder as a programmer, as a developer. So what I have here, and I have this the GitHub linked in the video description, is just a little tool to go ahead and basically be able to save things different ways, right? So I can go ahead and I can type in some information here, save it to, for example, Player Prefs, restart it, and then reload it, and bam, there we go, right? If I were to load my Json, I think it's saved exactly the same, where there might not actually be any value there, but same deal. If I go through JSON and say, hey, here's JSON Zach, and health is 1, just put ones in all this, and I save, make an error because I have the window already open. Sometimes that does happen, so if you're messing around with this, and you have that file like already open, let's do this one more time, like the file folder open, you'll get an error. Should be all good now. There you go. So I just had it open in my file explorer, so which you shouldn't have, right out the get-go. It's one error. I'm sure there are ways to go around and like say, hey, ignore that. If I remember right, there's like an extra setting in there that you can do when you try and write a file to be like ignore these kind of privacy things. But there's it saving JSON. And then we'll do one more with just the binary. Again, this is going to be Zach binary. Save it. There we go. We're all happy. And if we reload, I should have made a clear button just to clear that, but there we go, right? And if I load JSON, there's JSON, and then there's the player prefs. So now, these are 3 different ways that are super common in Unity to go about like saving things. But before we even get to like, well, what are the magic words to make these things work? I think it's worth going through like how you should set up your code. This is specifically for save data, but you can use like reading and writing files is used for everything, right? You can have a level editor that saves out a JSON file or a binary file, reloads it to like literally construct a level. What we call this is the model view controller, in this specific example with this Unity project, the model view controller kind of setup. And if you're in my Friday lecture hearing about that, that is one thing I forgot to bring up. The model is basically like the template of what our save data is, right? If we go to my save data class, opened up over here, this, we'll ignore this binary guy right now, is my save data class right now. This is my model. It's where all the like blueprints for the information is. It's kind of like the contract of what is being saved. My view is the UI right here, right? And my controller, in a more like complicated project, your controller would be a little bit more obvious. In this, it's simply, I would probably say, the save load script that I have right here that's actually saving and loading the stuff, like moving the data around, is what's actually my controller. The controller is the one that, like, depending on your, here comes a doggo. She's coming. Oh, it's blurry. You're not going to see her. When you see her blurry self walking around. The controller it's kind of like what disseminates the information. It pulls in the information and then puts it out. And we'll be back in just a second. Rue gave me a sign. She needed to go outside. I needed coffee. Because how can you talk code on a Sunday morning without coffee? Now, so like I was saying, controllers are kind of, in this case, if we were to go over to my, not that, that's a script that I deleted. My save load function, or like script, is kind of what's actually doing all the work, right? But we'll get into that in just a second. I want to go back to the model, and I know I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit here. But the model is where you're going to go about like putting in your save data. Now, kind of to like segue into like the different types of save data. Player prefs and binary can only save 3 different types of data: ints, strings, and floats. Correct me if I'm wrong if somebody has other information, but so in my research and my experience, that's what they're mostly able to do. Player Prefs does have one really good. We're gonna go over to my controller script here. Really good, like useful in a pinch um, method for like. Let me backtrack. When you're saving and loading, obviously you can start a game and there might not be a save file there right out the gate, right? Because you just bought the game, you're opening it up, there's nothing there. A lot of the times, in my experience, I'll put a save file in there that comes shipped with the game, just with nothing written in it, right? Like all the default values and all that good stuff. So there's always a file there. However, you can run into a case where you didn't do that. The player prefs, when you try and load, anytime you save, you have to kind of accommodate for that. You have to say, well, if there's no file here, what do I do? Do I make a new one? Do I do this? Do I do that? Player prefs basically just goes to Unity and says, hey, if I try and get this variable, this saved variable, and it's not there, we're kind of doing the load before the save here. When I try and get this string, in this case, let's say we're talking about the name string, and I know I'm getting into like specific lines of code here and I haven't gone through it. Just bear with me. I'm just trying to get some concepts out of the way. If I try and get the name, right, and there isn't anything there, if we hover over this, you can put in a default value. So it comes with a default value that you just say, hey, to make this make a little bit more sense, I could say default name, right? And that would be what pops up instead. In fact, actually, let's go do that. So if I go over to this, and one other cool thing is Unity, because Unity built Player Prefs, right? I'm going to make a fool of myself now, not remembering exactly where it is. They have a clear Player Prefs tool. They didn't used to have this. It used to be that you'd have to go to the different, oh, come on. Let's just search it. Unity also, if you're ever looking for something, has this cool search thing now. We've just added so much over the past few years. Clear all player prefs. Alrighty, so the computer just crashed. OBS is really great. What we were talking about before was being able to go and actually, oh, here comes Bella. You can go over here and you can hit clear all player prefs, and that gives you an opportunity to delete some of the stuff, or like remove the player prefs from your computer, which is pretty cool, right? And the reason that I want to show you guys that is because if I do that, and let's go back over to where did it go? It is here we go. If I go and I go to load player prefs, I went ahead and put a different default value in here, right? So the default value is what's going to load in when that file is gone, and I just deleted that file, right? Now, these other things real quick are just simply me saying like, hey, use what's already in the save data class. Save data class gets made. The save data class is there. It's just not saved anywhere, right? And we know that the value, like every variable has a default value unless you set it like to null, right? Which these basic types, you can't really do that. So int would give me a 0, string would give me empty quotes. Vector2 is just broken up into 2 floats, which would also give me zeros. Easy peasy. So when I go over here and I hit load player prefs, I get my default name because I said, hey, don't use the default string value, use default name, right? So that's how player prefs works. It is good in a pinch, but it is super limited because it does only have this set integer, set string, set float. Now, if we go scroll down, looking at binary is a little bit different. And I'm skipping over JSON because, spoiler alert, it's the best out of the 3 in my opinion. But binary does give you a little bit more control over things. I am doing this debug.log binary path. So what is that? Player prefs, you don't actually tell it to go anywhere. Unity, you can go search up the player prefs documentation, has a spot for player prefs no matter where you go, no matter what platform you're on. JSON and binary work very similarly in the fact that they need a path. And that path is pretty easy, like a file path to get to. And the path is pretty easy to build. On, I think, every platform, but don't quote me. I wouldn't be surprised if Apple complained. It's been a while for me, though. You can take what is called the application.persistent data path. So what that is it's basically just like an opportunity for you to go and say, hey, I want to save to this location. And Unity comes loaded up with different locations for like all the different, I'm going to mess with my gain just a little bit. There we go. It has a different location for all these different things on different platforms, right? I'm not going to get into like what all the specifics are, but using string concat, or you can do the little plus and add the two strings together. I'm going to say for my JSON file, I'm going to add it to a data.json file, and my binary, I'm going to do a bdata.text. Those are just the file names. Easy peasy. That's just what I want to call the file when I save it. It's like when you save a file, like a Word document, and ask you what you want to call it. That's what that bit is right there. So going over to my save binary, right? Print out the path just so I can go and find the file. Now this file stream, data stream equals new file, Basically, what we're doing is we're opening up a process to go and say, hey, let's write or open or do something with our file system, okay? We're going to do that at the path that we made already on start. And what we are going to be doing here is we're going to be creating a file, right? Now, theoretically, I'm pretty sure if let's delete file mode.create. We have, create new, open or create, truncate, all these different things. I'm using create, so I'm basically just making a new file every time. And it's going to overwrite it because it's going to the same path. There's probably better ways to do it. Again, I don't use binary path, I use JSON, but I wanted to expose everybody to it. Binary formatter is basically like a translator, right? It's what's actually going to go and turn us, our data class into binary, save it to, which can then be saved, right? In a specific format. That's where the formatter comes from, because we eventually will have to reinterpret that into our data for the game, right? This serializes the act of translation, right? It's saying, hey, binary formatter, I want you to, with this data stream, with all the permissions, and we're good to go, we're going here, we're creating all this stuff, let's take our save data binary instance. Now, I didn't really talk about that much, so I'm going to scroll back up. This guy, this binary compatible save data class, save data binary instance. It's just my save data class. Like I said at the very beginning, you should be making like a class for your save data. That's what we call the model in the model view controller. Like methodology of developing things. So the save data binary instance, might be thinking like, well, why can't I just use the save data class you have? There's a reason that I have two here, and usually you wouldn't do that. It's because binary, just like Player Prefs, unless somebody tells me different, like I don't know of a way to do it. And for my little bit of research into the binary formatter way, it can also only do the health, or I'm sorry, I read the health when I was looking at the end here. Integers, strings, and floats. So, it doesn't really work super great. I'm actually going to move myself over here because I don't think, I want to make sure I'm not blocking any file, like code. So this save binary, it's going and saying, hey, I'm going to use the one that was made. And let's go take a look at that, actually. The one that was made with two floats instead of a vector, right? Because I don't, I'm not going variable by variable. Ooh, there we go. So I can't like pick apart these variables. My file, my model has to be ready to go. So I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to close the data stream. I'm done messing with files, so I close it up. For loading, I say, hey, yo, a file exists at the path. Then I'm going to open up a new data stream, but this time we're opening, make the converter again. Because we translated it into a binary document, we now need to translate it back to our binary compatible save data class. So that's what we're doing here. We're saying, hey, the save data binary instance that we made, converter, I want you to deserialize or detranslate, if that's how you want to think of it, that data stream that we made, and cast it as a binary compatible save data class. So that way then this gets all filled in. Close it, and then again, this is just updating the text. This is doing the actual like view part of the model view controller stuff. While this whole script we're in right now is the controller part. So that's the power of the binary. So what does it actually look like? Let's go and let's say, let's give us some health. Let's give it some variables. And we'll do a save. There we go. Let's go over to that file location real fast. Oh, I already had it up. There we go. And if we open it up, it looks kind of crappy. You can't really read it. And that is good, you know, because that means players won't be able to read it. But it does also kind of mean like you can't do anything with it. And you might be thinking, well, what would I do with it? That's where JSON comes in. Because you might want to like have a document that, for example, let's say you have like 100 enemies in your game. And you want to have a document that you can easily update, that will update how much health they have, that will like right out the gate before any game logic kicks in, or how much damage they do, or you know, you have inventory costs and stuff like that that you're trying to update. Well, JSON does this stuff a little bit nicer in my opinion. If I do JSON save, we're saving the same data. And if I go, let's actually change it just to make sure that we're updating correctly. Exact JSON. And if I go and save my JSON, I'm going to go back. I saved it to the same spot, just a different file name. Our JSON is in a much more readable format, right? So there's my health, there's that, there's that, there's that. Now, let's say that this is like, let's say that instead of this being like the player, this is enemy data, right? And I'm the designer. I'm putting this all in a JSON document. It loads up, and that's where all of my enemies get. You've probably thought about this like with scriptable objects, stuff like that, right? You have your scriptable objects. It pulls the information from scriptable objects to go into the actual enemy that's spawned into the level. But scriptable objects, you can't really like update them outside as developer. Once your game launches, it goes with the objects. I mean, obviously you can put out updates and whatnot. But one cool thing with this is if I wanted to, say, have this sitting up on a server or something like that, and when a game launches, it can, you know, ping the server, be like, hey, what version is that document on? If it's on, let's say the user's got 1.0 version, server has 1.1, just pulls it down, and with a quick change here, I could say I have over 9,000 health. Say I wanted to make that change. Whoop. You just restart it so that way then I can just change that right there. Super easy, right? Big thing you can do is you can go and you can do stuff like this. You can have these small little tweaks that basically like the app or the game can look up at the server, pull a new version of a single document up. It's not a huge patch. It's just a small little file. And it can get all this new information. But how are we actually doing this, right? There are two different ways to use JSON. One is with what is called, in Visual Studio, it's called a NuGet package. In Unity, they do have a package that you can download from the package manager. I think you have to actually go and find it on the Unity website. It's not built in, called newtonsoft.json. It's a little bit more robust version of JSON. But, I mean, in this tutorial, I've been using Unity's built-in JSON stuff, and it seems like they've updated it recently. And it's a lot better than it used to be. So, Unity comes with this little JSON utility guy, which basically it works exactly the same as the binary stuff. It says, hey, let's make our save data class go to JSON. And what it does, if I go and run debugger, yeah, what it does is, we'll give it a minute because now it's got to recompile because we're doing the debugger. Need Vala to come over here and dance in front of the camera. Excellent. So I go and let's go get it ready to save. So let's save test, give it some health, give it some variables, and hit save. I like the word stringified, so I go and use that a lot. It basically takes the save data class and then turns that class into a single string. Exactly what we saw in that file that we were just looking at, right? It says, hey, here's the health, here's the name, here's all this stuff. And then it works exactly like the binary does. I check to see if the file exists, I write all the text, otherwise I create one, and then I write all the text. Easy peasy. And loading's the same deal, right? We get a string, we read all the text from the path, we say, hey, let's go ahead and convert it from JSON to my save data class. And then this is just, again, the view stuff, right? We're going to update the UI. So it's really, really simple. I know a lot of databases use JSON for their stuff.
I've used it with Microsoft Azure, Google Firebase. I'm pretty sure Amazon, AWS uses it as well because it is a very popular thing. Not only do these databases use it for like getting your information back and forth, web requests a lot of the time use it. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, I think. Don't quote me on the last what the N stands for. But so a lot of web services use that too. So if you're a little bit comfortable with JSON, you got a little bit of a foot in the door with web stuff as well because a lot of things are built off of JSON. The one other benefit to JSON is it does handle, like, if that, let's say our save data class changes, right, and we add some variables to it, it does handle that rather well. Where I know player prefs, that means you have to add another line into your code. If binary, I think it breaks. I haven't used it enough to really, off the top of my head, know how it handles that. But basically, there's a pretty common phenomenon of my save data contract, my model has changed, and the data that I'm ingesting and bringing into it, it no longer fits, right? So, in my experience, JSON's been the most robust in handling that. I'd love to hear other people's stories on that. I know it doesn't always work perfect, but it does work most of the time pretty well. But you'll also notice that, like, I didn't have to go and break up my vector 2. This is actually like the biggest part about JSON, right? Is as long as your class is marked system.serializable and it actually can be serialized, it usually just works. It just, and I said, oh man, I just did the Todd Howard thing. It just works. You don't have to most of the time break up different things. If I had a couple extra classes of like enemy data or level data or player stats or something like that, as long as they're serializable, I wouldn't have to break them down into individual variable components. I could just have those variables in my save data class. Unlike binary, where I had to break up a simple vector 2, and unlike player prefs, where I had to break up that simple vector 2. I will say that binary does have one leg up on player prefs on the fact that it can serialize collections. It's usually not a problem. But yeah, so that's the video. If you guys have any questions, or if you're like, hey, no, that was wrong, or if there's, any feedback at all, drop it in the comments.